this band said, you know, it's not about rich politicians. Well, I don't think Winston Peters is rich, but trying to win votes by courting absurd conspiracy theories and spouting misguided racist ideologies. But Peters, you know, he is very good at batting things away, and he said that the guitarist's views were a biased appraisal of what he said in his speech, and that he wasn't, it was a ham-fisted attempt at a story. So he's completely batted it off.
But will he stop using the song, I suppose, is the important
Well,
question.
as far as, you know what, as far as I know, I mean, he's even denying reports that he's been asked to stop playing the song. That's the latest I've heard. So, you know, watch this space. It's not the first time he's used it. He actually quoted the song in July last year. So I think he'll just grab onto this, and knowing Winston Peters, he'll make the most of it. He's a controversial figure in more ways than one.
It's not the first time that a band's song has been used to the dissatisfaction of the band. I think ABBA, Take a Chance on Me, that was used by John McCain. Rolling in the Deep by Adele, that was used by Donald Trump. Aerosmith, Dream On, that was used by Donald Trump. And then probably the most famous one, or the one that I certainly can remember, was Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA. That's been used a few times, but perhaps most notably by Ronald Reagan, and he wasn't keen on that, I don't think, was he, Walter?
No, he did not. He did not. To issue a correction here, I did not realize that Chumbawamba song was released in 1997. I thought that was like a 1980s movie, so I mean 80s song. So I was well out of college at that point, so probably not moving, you know, quite as much as I would have been in the 80s. But I still like the song. I still like the song.
It's a good song. It's very iconic for the north of England, I think, as well. Do you think, Sharon, that it can damage the reputation of a band if a particular politician or a particular group of politicians might start using it for their rallies?
Well, I don't know if it damages the band's reputation, but it kind of, I think here in New Zealand, you know, if that song gets rolled out, we'll associate it with Winston Peters, and you know, if you're at a party or something, do you really want to be getting out there on the dance floor and then all of a sudden you're reminded of this politician who, by the way, is very good at getting stuck into the media here. So yeah, I think it's more that it spoils the song.
It does work, doesn't it? I mean, and as you say, I remember 1997, Things Can Only Get Better was the song by Dee Ream that the New Labour Party had when they came into office, and whenever I hear that song, which is fairly rare these days to be honest, but I don't think of the particular band, I actually end up thinking of 1997 and the new government that came in at that point. Walter, have you got any final thoughts, because on this particular story, before we move on to our final story of the day, which is going to be a big Wednesday, but just, have you got any...
Well, I could pull this all together because Nikki Haley used the song "I Don't Give a Damn About My Reputation" by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts for her most recent run for president. So there we go. You know, you can a song "Don't Care About the Reputation."
Okay, well, as we said, tomorrow, Wednesday, well, today in some parts of the world, is a big day. The US Federal Reserve will announce what it's going to do with interest rates. The Fed plays a crucial role in shaping the US economy, but also economies around the world, as everyone sort of looks at the Fed and wonders what they're going to do with interest rates. So they have a ripple effect for mortgages and credit cards as well, don't they? So what's on the horizon? Walter, what are you looking for? What have you been, as they say, pricing in on this one?
Yeah, so the market started the year looking for 7 cuts by the Fed. They're now looking for less than 3. And so the market is definitely repriced. And yeah, I don't think the Fed's obviously not going to do anything tomorrow, but the bet now is July for the first cut. So does Powell say something during the press conference that disrupts that view? That's the question. So the press conference will be the key. Powell tends to invariably stick his foot in his mouth in response to one question or another during the press conference. So we'll be listening in then. And
so the reason it's gone from 7 rate cuts down to 3, there are many reasons, but it's inflation, isn't it? It's remained sticky, hasn't it? It's core inflation. It's been really tough to get down. We were talking about wage increases and people asking for wages. Partly, those high wages have added to this tricky situation that the Fed's found itself in.
Yeah, absolutely. We've gotten 2 kind of hot CPI readings in the last couple of months. And as you said, wages has been a factor there. But really, core services inflation is still just really not come down. So you think about all the people that are traveling and revenge travel and all that. That's kept inflation very elevated. Whereas goods inflation is actually down. It's actually in deflation. So they want to see, you're going to hear the word evidence like 10 times tomorrow at some point during the press conference. They want more confidence, more evidence of inflation is on the right track.
We will play Evidence Bingo tomorrow, and do join us again on Business Matters tomorrow when we'll have a full roundup of what the Fed's decision has been. Thank you very much for listening today. Thank you to Walter Todd and to Sharon Brett Kelly for joining us on the programme.
This is the BBC World Service, and here's what World Book Club will be reading next.
The Weekend by Australian author Charlotte Wood is a darkly funny but also often poignant novel. 3 women in their 70s are clearing out their deceased friend's dilapidated beach house. As they sort through a lifetime of possessions, memories stir, tensions simmer, and soon the bonds of friendship start to fray.
World Book Club from the 6th of April. In 30 minutes, the climate question.
Listeners are taking over the show with their climate questions, from whether climate change could cause more volcanic eruptions and earthquakes to how we'll power a new fleet of electric vehicles. Plus, is climate change reversible?
The newsroom is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
At 2 hours GMT, welcome to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Paul Moss. In this programme we have a rare report from the fighting in Sudan, where the United Nations is warning of famine.
There are 150 people here. I knew many of them. Muhammad, Abdullah, Jalal. It's just me left.
Texas gets the go-ahead to introduce its own laws to try and stop illegal immigrants. Donald Trump has a few choice words to say on the subject.
We have millions of criminals in our country that are up for murder and drug dealers and everything else.
Also in this edition, the US is still right behind Ukraine. Or so its defense secretary says. Aung San Suu Kyi's old house goes up for auction. We ask if China's romance with Australia is back on track. And would you want your football club coached by artificial intelligence? Liverpool are interested. All that after a bulletin of international news.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. The Biden administration has said a Supreme Court decision to allow a Texas state law on migration to take effect will damage American border security. Though still subject to legal review, it's one of the toughest immigration laws enacted by any U.S. state. More details from Peter Rose.
The law, which is still subject to legal review in a lower court, means police officers in Texas can arrest migrants suspected of being in the state illegally and either prosecute them or order them returned to Mexico. The White House says it fundamentally disagrees with the Supreme Court's ruling, arguing that it violates the US Constitution by interfering with the federal government's power to regulate immigration. A senior Mexican official has said the country would not accept migrants who Texas state officials attempt to deport under the law.
President Biden has accused Donald Trump of despising Latinos and highlighted his rival's repeated use of anti-immigrant rhetoric. The attack comes as polls show the historically Democratic voting Latino community is increasingly leaning towards backing Mr. Trump in November's presidential election. Two white former police officers in the U.S. state of Mississippi have received lengthy jail terms for their part in the torture of two black men last year. Hunter Elwood and Jeffrey Middleton received sentences of 20 years and 17.5 years respectively. The victims were beaten, shot with stun guns, and sexually assaulted by 6 officers who burst into their homes without a warrant. Malik Shabazz is a lawyer for the victims.
Let this be a warning to all police officers in the United States of America, particularly those who are lieutenants and supervisors. If you allow deputies and officers under your command to go rogue, to commit crimes, and to abuse persons, you will be held equally as responsible as the shooter and the abuser.
A member of Haiti's Transitional Council tasked with establishing a new leadership has said Haiti cannot be ruled by criminals. Leslie Voltaire, a former minister, told the BBC, security begins at the head, and whoever is chosen to lead the country should be free of the powerful masters who he said were behind the gangs.
Those guys, those bandits, cannot rule Haiti. They cannot govern. They say that they have put Ariel Henry out, but they cannot enter into the palace. They cannot enter into the Prime Minister's office. They are talking about revolution, but those are thugs and criminals, and we cannot let Haiti be ruled by criminals.
BBC News. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong has said her country will seek to manage differences with China through dialogue. She was speaking to reporters following a meeting with her counterpart Wang Yi in Canberra.
Dialogue enables us to manage our differences. It doesn't eliminate them, but this government, in the interest of Australia, will always seek to manage those differences wisely. As I said in the outset of my meeting, China will always be China, Australia will always be Australia. However, we want to continue to engage, to cooperate where we can and disagree when we must, and to manage these differences wisely.
Ms. Wong said a range of shared interests had been discussed and that she also raised concerns about Beijing's human rights record. The United States says it's received mixed signals from Niger following last weekend's announcement by the military government that it had revoked an accord allowing U.S. forces to operate in the West African country. Prior to last year's coup, Niger was a partner with Washington against Islamist insurgents in the region. The BBC has seen the destruction caused by 11 months of fighting in some of Sudan's biggest cities. The main market in Omdurman, across the Nile from the capital Khartoum, is empty, filled not with shoppers, but with rubble and twisted metal. The army blames its paramilitary rivals, the RSF, but witnesses say army airstrikes caused considerable damage. Researchers in the Netherlands say they've been able to eliminate HIV from cells in a laboratory, raising hopes of an eventual cure for humans. Using a gene-editing tool known as CRISPR-Cas, the scientists say they could target the DNA of the disease, removing all traces of the virus from infected cells. BBC World News.
You're listening to the newsroom with me, Paul Moss. Perhaps this sounds familiar. Civilians caught up in fighting with thousands killed, warnings of famine, aid deliveries struggling to get through with desperately needed food and medicine. However, we're talking here not about Gaza, but Sudan. The war there may have faded from the headlines, but it's very much ongoing. Conflict broke out last April when a militia called the Rapid Support Forces turned on the army in a battle for control. The result? One of the world's biggest humanitarian crises, with millions made to leave their homes. BBC Arabic's Feraz Kalani travelled with the Sudanese army to the frontline city of Omdurman and sent this report.
Moments of celebration for a rare success in a forgotten war. A fragile victory for Sudanese army troops against fighters of the Rapid Support Forces. The army is pushing towards the capital, with the RSF still controlling areas nearby. to Sudan's second largest city, Omdurman, on the west of the River Nile. The main market was once crowded and full of life, but what we saw was destroyed. Bullet holes, twisted metal, rubble everywhere. The army brought us here, keen to show us the damage they say the RSF inflicted to this city. They tightly controlled what we saw and where we went. We heard stories of rape, looting and violence. The UN says both sides face accusations of horrific abuses and war crimes, claims they both deny. Thousands of people have been killed since this war erupted last April. Millions have had to leave their lives behind, but some couldn't, and they paid the price. 64-year-old Mukhtar shows me how the war turned his town square into a makeshift graveyard.
There are 150 people here. I knew many of them. Muhammad, Abdullah, Jalal. It's just me left.
A moment to remember their names. These graves are now just marked with numbers. Children are facing a living nightmare here according to the UN. They say a whole generation's future is at risk. We are at a school that's now a shelter in Port Sudan for families fleeing the violence. 300 of them crammed into the classrooms and corridors.
These classrooms should be full of children learning. Instead, desperate people from across Sudan are sheltering here for safety. But there are horrible stories hidden here. 5 people have died of cholera, and others are suffering from severe diseases.
In a small room with 20 people sharing 8 beds, Zubayda, a mother of 8, has leukemia. She hasn't had any medication for her illness since the war started nearly a year ago.
My last pills finished 3 days before the war. From that moment on, I'm suffering. I'm in constant pain. I'm so tired.
The cries of starving children being treated in a clinic. It feels like a front line of a humanitarian disaster the world doesn't know is happening. Mary Louise, the UNICEF Deputy Representative for Sudan, told us hundreds of thousands of children are at emergency levels of hunger, and it will get worse.
We're facing right now a lethal combination of mass displacement, hunger, and disease outbreaks, and that's putting Sudan on the brink of famine.
Before we leave, we meet Ikram. She is cuddling her 3-year-old daughter, who is desperately sick. Through her tears, she struggles to tell us the RSF stole her home, stole her life. The appeal from here is clear. The world is being urged not to forget this war or the people of Sudan.
That report by Faraz Kalami. The US state of Texas has always had a reputation for doing its own thing. Texas was an independent country for 10 years back in the 19th century. And now it's being told it could go ahead and enforce its own law on immigration. A law which says people crossing into Texas illegally could be arrested by state police. Now, why this matters is because immigration law is supposed to be decided by the national government in Washington. But the US Supreme Court has now decided that Texas can impose its own rules, at least for now. I'm joined by our North America correspondent, Peter Bose. Peter, how does this work if states are not supposed to be in control of immigration? Or how did the US Supreme Court say Texas can set out its own measures?
Well, Texas last year approved the bill which allows police in the state to arrest people for illegally crossing the Mexico border. The federal government opposed it, and the case is still going through the courts. The Supreme Court has not offered an opinion on it, except to say that the law can temporarily go into effect while the issues at stake continue to be thrashed out. So the overriding question of a state's sovereignty, its ability to do something that would traditionally have been controlled at a federal level, is still to be decided. That said, there is clearly a political divide in the Conservative-dominated Supreme Court. The three Liberal justices opposed the ruling, with one of them saying that the law would open-end the long-standing federal-state balance of power and self-rule.
There's a political division in the country as well. The White House has criticised the decision, criticised Texas for what it wants to do, but now it seems that President Biden can't make the rules here. Does that make him look weaker if he can't assert powers which are supposed to be his?
Well, the way government works in this country, just because a president disagrees with something or believes lies, in this case within the power of federal government, doesn't mean that things can't change. The states have powers to introduce laws. The Supreme Court can act as an ultimate arbiter. So take, for example, the ending of a woman's constitutional right to have an abortion. That came out of a Supreme Court decision. It moved the powers to decide to individual states, even though Joe Biden strongly disagreed.
You said that this allows Texas to do this for the time being, but what's the time scale here? How long will Texas be able to carry on imposing its own immigration laws?
Well, we don't know exactly, but there's pressure on the legal system to sort this out quickly. The case will now head back to a three-judge panel from the US Court of Appeals. Oral arguments were originally scheduled for April 3rd, but since the Supreme Court's ruling, the court is going to be sitting in just a few hours' time later on Wednesday. The bottom line from all of this quite complex legal manoeuvring is that nothing is set in stone for the long term, and even the Supreme Court has indicated that the case may well end up back with its justices at some point.
Peter Bowes, thank you very much. Immigration set to be a key issue in America's forthcoming presidential election, and Donald Trump is hoping to make the issue his own. He famously once described Mexican immigrants as murderers and rapists. Indeed, many think that helped win him crucial votes in 2016, along with his pledge to ban all Muslims from coming to the US. Mr. Trump doesn't seem to have softened his stance, although President Biden accused him of despising people of Latin American origin. Speaking on the British television station GB News on Tuesday, Mr. Trump was asked how he would tackle migrants at the Mexican-US border if he was re-elected.
Sure, I'm going to deport them. They're here legally, especially these criminals. We're going to get them out right away. We have millions of criminals in our country that are up for murder and drug dealers and everything else. We have, what's happened to our country is not even to be believed.
While he was cranking up the rhetoric on immigration, Mr. Trump also defended his comments last month, in which he said he would actively encourage Russia to invade any NATO country which wasn't pulling its weight in terms of military spending.
What I'm saying is that's a form of negotiation. Why should we guard these countries that have a lot of money, and the United States was paying for most of NATO? The question was asked by the head of a major country. They said, so if we don't pay our bills, are you going to protect us from Russia? They said, you mean you're delinquent? You're not paying the bills? Yes. Nope, I'm not going to pay you. We're not going to do it. We're not going to defend you.
Well, no such questioning from the current inhabitants of the White House. Joe Biden and his cabinet say they are unequivocally committed to NATO and to supporting Ukraine. Tuesday saw the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin stress that commitment at a meeting of global defense officials at the Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Our Berlin correspondent Jessica Parker reports.
Discussions between allies about aid to Ukraine go on behind closed doors, but the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had some public messages to convey. While the US has sourced a one-off $300 million fund for Ukraine's defense, a $60 billion package is still stuck in Washington. Mr. Austin said he hopes the money would soon come through.
Today, Ukraine's survival is in danger, and America's security is at risk. They don't have a day to waste, and we don't have a day to spare either. So I leave here today fully determined to keep U.S. security assistance and ammunition flowing. And make no mistake, Putin is watching, The world is watching, and history is watching.
Despite Lloyd Austin's assurances, European nations are increasingly talking about how to become more self-sufficient. The European Council President, Charles Michel, has said the continent should shift to a war economy, saying it can no longer be at the mercy of US election cycles, but countries such as Germany have much ground to make up. Europe's biggest economy is set to hit the 2% NATO spending target this year, but that's for the first time since the early 90s.
Jessica Parker, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Paul Moss. Our main news: the US Supreme Court has said Texas can temporarily continue to impose a law which allows the state to detain and deport suspected illegal immigrants. The White House says the decision will sow chaos at the southern border. Now, it's one of the great love-hate relationships of international diplomacy. China and Australia have at times seemed positively betrothed to each other. China attracted by Australia's raw materials, all that coal, metal, and of course Australian beef. And Australia, well, it just likes getting its hands on China's cash, whether from exports or from all those visiting Chinese tourists. But this is a relationship which has soured in recent years, the couple squabbling over issues like trade, power in the Pacific, comments which the Chinese saw as insulting. However, it looks like the romance may be back on track. China's foreign minister is making his first visit to Australia since 2017. Well, our Sydney correspondent Phil Mercer joins us now. Phil, what brought about this visit?
Well, Wang Yi is the most powerful Chinese politician to visit Australia since 2017. Essentially, both countries need each other, especially economically. They are economically interdependent, and there appears to be a real appetite on both sides to diffuse these tensions. China is by far Australia's biggest trading partner, and China has been highly reliant on those raw materials you mentioned from Australia, most notably iron ore and liquefied natural gas. And we got a real sense here in Australia after the election of a Labour government in Canberra in May of 2022 that there was a real sense of détente developing, both sides eager to stabilise relations with both Chinese and Australian authorities exchanging meetings and really trying to put these tensions to bed.
I talked about those differences over things like trade, but you know, Australia is very worried about China's growing influence on the Pacific, which is effectively Australia's backyard. I mean, that military tension, that's not going to go away anytime soon, is it?
No, the Australian Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong said that before the meeting today in Canberra with her Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, that she was expecting frank exchanges of views with her Chinese counterpart. Beijing's ambitions in the South China Sea have been a source of friction between Canberra and Beijing, as have China's efforts to expand its influence in the Pacific. This is, as you say, a region that Australia traditionally regards as its sphere of influence. China signed a security pact with Solomon Islands back in 2021. This is a strategically located archipelago to the northeast of Australia. So this high-profile meeting in Canberra between the foreign ministers is further proof that relations are on the mend, but quite clearly differences and disagreements remain.
Phil Mercer in Sydney, thanks very much indeed. Once upon a time, it served effectively as a prison, a small lakeside house in the capital of what was then Burma, where the pro-democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi was kept under house arrest. The building itself became famous, with Miss Suu Kyi sometimes making speeches from its gate. She even hosted visiting dignitaries there, like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. But now, the house is going up for auction, following a long battle between Aung San Suu Kyi and her estranged brother. Now, to tell us more, I'm joined by the BBC Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head. Jonathan, what is the story behind this dispute?
Well, it is a very long dispute. Aung San Suu Kyi's older brother has lived overseas. He's an American citizen for a long time, but he challenged her ownership of the house, which she took over from when her mother died back in 1988. He challenged it way back in the year 2000. That he's continued to challenge it time and again, even under previous periods of military rule. The courts found against him, and Aung San Suu Kyi was able to continue living there. Now, a few years ago, a final court ruling said that the land, the house sits on quite an extensive patch of land in a very important part of central part of Yangon, should be divided, but she owned the house and half the land. And that seemed to be an end to it. But since the military seized power, it has now decided to rule that the house must be sold entirely, and the proceeds then divided between Aung San Suu Kyi and her brother. Many people see this as an attempt to essentially destroy what is seen very much as a symbol of Aung San Suu Kyi's long struggle for democracy in Myanmar. I mean, the house really is, it's an incredibly potent symbol of that long struggle. She spent 15 years under house arrest there. It was also the headquarters of her party, the National League for Democracy, in its early years. And people have long suspected that her brother is in fact acting as a proxy for the military, although we've never seen any evidence for that. Certainly the fact that this decision has taken place while Aung San Suu Kyi has been held incommunicado ever since the coup and has been unable to even talk to her lawyers about the sale of the house, has raised an awful lot of questions and protests about this sale, which is due to start the auction in the next hour or so.
She is, as you say, still in detention, but Aung San Suu Kyi lost a lot of support internationally when she appeared to back the Myanmar army in its massacre of the Rohingya people. Is she still considered a crucial figure in the country's pro-democracy movement?
I think she is, although her stature is different from what it was. A lot of the people who got involved in this now titanic struggle, civil war, to overthrow the military, argue that they need to move beyond their dependence on her, that they need, and that they need more flexible thinking about what the future of Myanmar may be. But she still has incredible respect. She's wildly popular still in very large parts of the country, even though she's now 77 years old. I think most people believe that 78 that she is now, that's right. Most people believe that any settlement of the conflict in Myanmar, if there is one, will have to involve her, that she will certainly play a big role in that. There's very little doubt that if that point ever comes, the military will deploy her as part of any kind of deal. She remains there's no one else like her who's got the kind of stature that she has, and that's just not going to change. There are no other leaders like her.
Jonathan, thanks very much indeed. Police in Brazil have accused the former president, Jair Bolsonaro, of falsifying his COVID vaccination records, opening the door to possible criminal charges. His health records say he received a jab in Sao Paulo in July 2021. But an investigation later found he wasn't in the city at the time. Our correspondent Ione Wells is in Sao Paulo.
Jair Bolsonaro, who was a COVID skeptic, vowed publicly to never get the COVID vaccine when he was in office. Yet some of his health records say he did receive the vaccination, which, for example, would have allowed him to travel to the US at a time when most foreign visitors had to be vaccinated. Last year, his house was raided by police as part of the investigation. He has repeatedly denied any knowledge of his records being tampered with. After his indictment by police, the former president told Reuters he was calm and claimed the world knows he did not take the vaccine.
Ione Wells. Time now for the sport. Here's Andy Barwell.
And the women's tennis world number 2, Aryna Sabalenka, still intends to play in the Miami Open this week, despite the death of her boyfriend, the former ice hockey player Konstantin Koltsov. Well, Sabalenka would face Paula Badosa, who defeated Simona Halep over 3 sets earlier today in what was Halep's return to playing for the very first time since completing her doping ban. The International Olympic Committee has ruled that Russian and Belarusian nationals competing as neutral athletes in the Paris Games this summer won't be allowed to take part in the opening parade of teams. BBC Sports correspondent Laura Scott sent us this report.
The International Olympic Committee said that so far 12 individual neutral athletes with a Russian passport and 7 with a Belarusian passport have qualified for Paris 2024 of the 6,000 quota places that have already been awarded. But their eligibility to compete will be determined by a newly created review panel. The IOC said the logic behind these athletes not being included in the opening ceremony was that they were not part of a delegation, and the parade of boats up the River Seine is only for teams.
Football, West Ham United chairman and major shareholder David Sullivan thinks that the Premier League may cease to be the world's top division if an independent regulator is introduced. And Sullivan is more than a little concerned.
It's the top league in the world. Big export. Other countries want to buy it off us. We do very well in Europe generally. Anything towards down our income or make us less competitive, we may cease to be the top league, so they may ruin an asset that we have.
And Women's European Champions League quarter-final action in the first leg matches. Chelsea were 3-0 winners away at Ajax, and Lyon had a 2-1 success at Benfica.
Andy Barber. And staying with sport, Google's artificial intelligence division DeepMind has created a prototype AI football coach to help teams improve their performance. The program, known as Tactic AI, was developed in collaboration with the English club Liverpool, as Danny Aberhart reports.
Elite sport is big business, and increasingly big data helps give an edge. Football fans might not care for the algorithms, but if it means their teams defend corners better, they'll no doubt swallow the encroachment on the game's romance. DeepMind focused on corners partly because they and other set pieces account for about a third of goals, but also because they start from a fixed point. The company says Tactic AI analysed thousands of real corners and suggested tweaks to defenders' positioning. In blind tests, it says, real human experts at Liverpool preferred the AI positioning in 90% of scenarios. Such innovations, it says, could revolutionise sport and be applied to fields ranging from robotics to traffic control. But analysing the dynamism of open play remains a challenge, even for AI, so the likes of Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola won't be out of a job just yet.
Danny